The global elites plan to take over the world. I'm going to reveal this to you in 9 simple, fast steps. It starts with defining some terms. I believe this is the vision of today's central planner. They are all Marxists and socialists at heart. We'll get into that in just a moment. But who are the global elite I'm referring to? The people at the World Economic Forum, the IMF, the Davos crowd, the useful idiots in the media, and I'm using that term specifically. That's the term that Stalin and Lenin used way back in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s to describe the journalists in the mainstream media in the United States that were sympathetic to communism or Marxism. The do-gooders. This is a term used by Milton Friedman to describe people in society that were inadvertently doing the bidding of these megacorporations, politicians, and global elite. The people at the top would have an ulterior motive, but the people at the bottom would think that they are standing up for a good cause, when in reality, they were just promoting the objective of the people at the top. And the third group is the good old ignorant, the people that are just blindly walking through life, oblivious to the fact that they're having their freedoms and liberties slowly taken away one step at a time. So now we understand who the players are. Let's get into the global elite's plan to take over the world. This is a quick summary. What I'm going to do in future videos is go into the detail of each one of these 9 steps. So their socialist utopian vision, the workers' paradise from the Marxists. How do they achieve this objective? The first thing, they got to control the economy. They do that through a central bank digital currency. This completely eliminates your privacy because now you, the average Joe and Jane, the small and mid-sized business, even the big corporations and banks, have an account at the Federal Reserve or the central bank. Therefore, every single transaction that you make on a daily basis, they see. The data goes to them in real time. Well, what this does is it allows them to further micromanage demand. So what this means is if you are buying too many things that they don't approve of, they'll go ahead and cut you off. They'll give you a monthly allowance. And we've seen this recently with these credit cards that come out and measure your carbon score. So you can imagine if every single transaction was going to the central bank, the political party in power could give you a specific allowance of credits for, let's say, beef, for gas, for housing costs, because each one of those transactions to them negatively impacts the environment, as an example. But more importantly, it gives them real-time data. So let's think this through. Right now, you have an account with Wells Fargo or Bank of America. So your transactions are going to kind of a decentralized banking system. But if all those transactions are going into the central bank, then they have a better idea of what is happening at all times throughout the economy. This is incredibly important, and we'll get to why in just a moment. But I also want to point out that this allows them to extend credit and micromanage interest rates. If you really think about it, now we have monetary policy for an entire society. But what a central bank digital currency would do would allow them to create monetary policy at the individual level. We're going to get into a social score in just a moment, but you can imagine this world where if your social score isn't at a certain level, then you would have to pay a higher interest rate for your next home loan, if you could even get approved in the first place. So this gives them a tremendous amount of control over the demand in the economy. It also gives them a lot of control over the supply in the economy, credit and interest rates, but it doesn't necessarily get them into this socialist utopia. And how I'm defining that is where the central planners, the global elites themselves, have control over the means of production. But insert step number 2. This is where they introduced artificial intelligence. Remember, they have all of the real-time data coming in from the real economy. Every single transaction daily. That would be billions and billions of transactions in the US economy. If they can layer over artificial intelligence, this can allow them to allocate scarce resources with alternative uses efficiently. So why is this important? If you go back to communist Russia, one of the main reasons the entire economy collapsed is because they didn't have price discovery. There was no price mechanism, there was no price signal, so they couldn't figure out how to allocate those scarce resources with alternative uses efficiently. And I think the global elites are smart enough to know this. So I think their solution in the future will be, hey, if we have all of this data coming in real time, if we can get artificial intelligence to crunch the numbers, to crunch the data, the artificial intelligence can tell us how to allocate scarce resources with alternative uses even more efficiently than the free market could with price signals. The bottom line is the better they could get artificial intelligence to allocate resources, the more power and control they could centralize without sacrificing efficiency. Keep in mind, these are their words, not mine. I want to be very clear there. I'm just going over what I think their objectives are and how they may try to achieve those objectives in the future. Step number three, is they would destroy small and mid-sized businesses. We've seen this happening in 2020 and 2021. Everyone says that what happened to the economy was a result of the cerveza sickness. I would adamantly disagree. I always correct people and say what has happened to the economy is not a result of the cerveza sickness, but a result of the government's response to the cerveza sickness. In which case, you guys know, every one of you watching this video, that hundreds of thousands of small and mid-sized businesses in the United States alone went bust. And in 2021, we're seeing them take this a step further where they're basically forcing mid-sized businesses with over 100 employees to fire 10, 15, maybe even 20% of their staff that refuse to do something that the government wants them to do. Keep it YouTube friendly. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you think about this, they're creating this additional regulation, this additional burden on businesses when businesses are facing the largest labor shortage we have ever seen in the United States. They're basically kicking these businesses when they're already down. Regardless of whether this is intentional or unintentional, the net result is still the same. We have fewer small and mid-sized businesses today, far fewer than we had in 2019. And this takes us to step number 4, where they're consolidating all of the power and control into these mega corporations. The amount of demand that we have for goods and services has not decreased. But if we decrease the amount of small and mid-sized businesses, that means the demand is now going into Amazon, as an example. They're the ones that are benefiting. And if you're one of the global elite, you have to ask yourself the question, is it easier to micromanage, or let's say influence, 1 million or 2 million small businesses or one mega corporation like Amazon? You can envision a world where 90% of the goods and services are supplied by, let's say, 100 of these mega corporations that are all going to Davos and under the influence, drinking the Kool-Aid, let's say, of Klaus Schwab, the IMF, and the World Economic Forum. This gives the global elite far more control over the goods and services that are being consumed in society by the average Joe and Jane. But I think it's a two-pronged approach. We talked about them trying to control the economy, but I think they'll also need to control the people if they're to achieve their objective of this socialist utopia, where they are the central planners. They have all the power, the control, and they are micromanaging your life. And this takes us to step number 5. We talked about this earlier. They're going to set up a social credit score. And this dovetails perfectly with the central bank digital currency because they can see every single thing you're buying in real time. And if you're buying something that they don't approve of, then they can go ahead and reduce your score. They will penalize you to try to push you in the direction of doing exactly what they want you to do at all times. This is the ultimate micromanagement of an economy, a society, and your life. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to convince people to go along with this scheme. And I think that's where step number 6 comes into play. And this is the use of propaganda. We have to go back to a country in the 1930s that used propaganda extremely well. And I think that individuals and entities that are trying to usurp more power and control today will just look back on history, see what has worked, and they'll just implement the exact same strategy. So that propaganda strategy starts with getting society to completely abandon critical thinking. Rational, objective thought isn't important anymore. What's really important is how you feel. So stop thinking and start feeling. That's what's most important. And we see this playing out in today's society. Talk to any young person and ask them directions to the local Starbucks. They won't say, I think you go down there and take a left. They'll say, I feel like you should go down there and take a left. Or you say, my goodness, is the North Pole north or south? And they won't say, I think it's north. They'll say, I feel like it's north. You see, and I don't know that that was done intentionally, but I think that's an interesting observation. Now, they may be using implicit means to try to change the vocabulary, to also change people's mindset in society, but they're doing this explicitly as well. We've seen several articles come out over the last year that try to encourage you to not use critical thinking when it comes to the cerveza sickness. In fact, I've seen some articles go so far as to say that critical thinking is dangerous and you should avoid it at all costs. This is exactly what this group did in Germany in the 1930s. But they took it a few steps further. The next thing they did is they really used this propaganda in the media, in education, and in entertainment. I hope all of you right now, even the biggest skeptic, can see how this is playing out right now. Is there any debate that if you turn on CNN or MSNBC, that it skews in one political direction, that they've got a narrative that they are trying to push every single night? Now, I would argue Fox is the same way in the opposite direction, but we know that the majority of the mainstream media has a specific narrative, a specific objective, and it's not to report the news, it's to really use propaganda to manipulate you and try to influence you. They're doing the exact same thing with the universities and education, where they're all going woke. And this woke agenda really has its roots in Marxism. And entertainment. When's the last time that you went to a movie and actually watched a movie? Probably a long, long time ago. Now what happens when you watch a movie or turn on a basketball game? You get some sort of woke agenda crammed down your throat from the beginning of the movie all the way till the very end. Then the third thing they did very successfully in this country in the 1930s is they created a boogeyman. So all of their problems they had, they could attribute to public enemy number one. And what this does is it allows them to control the society by creating one common enemy. And I think this is happening right now with the people that choose not to get the medicine. Editor, go ahead and throw up some articles and you guys can see exactly what I'm referring to, where in today's society in the United States, these politicians and a lot of the people that are in charge of these institutions, they're trying to blame almost every problem we have on this public enemy number one. This takes us straight into step number 7, which is create as much divisiveness as possible. This is pretty much dictator 101 right here. You try to get society fighting with each other, because when they're fighting with one another, they're not going to notice all of the freedom and liberty that you are taking away from them. Stalin was most notably very successful using this tactic in Russia. And again, I think the global elite are just going back throughout history and looking at what worked well and just doing that today to achieve their objectives. And I would ask the question, is there any better way to create this divisiveness in today's society than encouraging people to wear a mask? Just by that simple gesture, you can see on the outside of people's face basically what their political beliefs are. So before, you would never want to talk about religion, politics, or money. But now all you have to do is look at someone's face when they're outside, and you can determine whether you like them or whether you hate them. You don't even have to talk to them anymore. Whether this is intentional or unintentional, it doesn't matter, because the net result is still the same. In the United States today, we have more divisiveness than we have ever seen, and it's only getting worse by the day. And this plays right into the global elite's plan to take over the world. Step number 8 is they're trying to condition you to be more receptive to anything they ask you to do. They want you to be more receptive to them taking away more of your freedoms and liberties. There's an interesting psychological study that was done, and it was called the foot in the front door theory or experiment. And this is where psychologists went to, I believe it was California, and they went to a neighborhood and they simply asked people to put a small sign in their front yard. Maybe it was to encourage people to drive slowly. So then they took the people who agreed to that. The next group, they asked them to sign a petition. Then they put the people in a category that agreed to do that. Then the third group, they didn't ask them to do anything. Then they went back to all three groups and asked them to put a giant sign in their front yard. The group that didn't agree to anything, less than 20% of the people said yes. The group that signed the petition, about 55%. The group that agreed to the small sign, over 75% said yes to the larger sign. So let's go back to 2020, where they first start off by asking you to wear a mask. And they say, actually, we need you to lock yourself in a cage. Well, actually, we need you to wear 5 masks. Well, actually, we need you to inject a foreign substance into your body. Actually, we need you to inject that foreign substance into the body of your pregnant wife or your 5-year-old. You see, they keep asking for more and more and more, and the probability of society agreeing to that bigger ask increases with every single thing they agree to. So what happens after the cerveza sickness? Let's say this is all in the rear view mirror. I think the next step for the global elite is to take the control they now have over the economy, assuming they're able to achieve all these steps, to take the control they have over the people and channel that into the ultimate form of usurping power and control, which is climate change. I'm not here to say that it's real or fake. I'll let you be the judge. But I am here to say that the global elite don't care about the climate. They don't care about carbon emissions. They don't care about clean air. They only care about gaining that power and control and micromanaging your life. So think about climate change through the lens of the ultimate crisis. And remember what these politicians have always told us. You never let a good crisis go to waste. Whether the crisis was something that was planned and created, or whether the crisis happens naturally, it doesn't matter. The net result is still the same, and that's these individuals are going to try to leverage that crisis to achieve their objectives of a centrally planned global society. And climate change is the ultimate. Why? Because it's a crisis that exists far into the future. It's something that's subjective. It's something that's very difficult to measure. You can't feel it. You can't touch it. It's not tangible. And therefore, they can just throw it out there 20, 30 years that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, now you want to destroy humanity. You see, they started to condition you in 2020 and 2021 that if you didn't obey, then you wanted to kill grandma and grandpa. But now they can say you not only want to destroy Earth, but you want to kill all of humanity. I want to cut to a clip of a politician just the other day in Australia. And this illustrates how much emotion and hysteria is really revolving around the cerveza sickness. So once you watch this clip, then ask yourself if they can achieve this level of emotion around something that is, let's be honest, bad, but it's not brain cancer, for heaven's sakes. What type of emotion and hysteria can the global elite create with what amounts to the destruction of the entire planet and the human race? Editor, cut to the clip.
If you are anti-mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. I don't care what your personal vaccination status is. If you support, champion, give a green light, give comfort to, support anybody who argues against the vaccine, you are an anti-vaxxer. Absolutely. Your personal vaccination status is utterly irrelevant. If you campaign against the mandate, if you campaign against people being vaccinated in vulnerable settings, teachers in classrooms, I'll be really clear. At that point in time, people were actually supporting the idea of a teacher being unvaccinated in a remote community classroom with kids who cannot be vaccinated. I reject that utterly, and I still reject it. And if you are out there in any way, shape, or form campaigning against this mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. If you say pro-persuasion, stuff it, shove it. We are absolutely going to make sure as many Territorians as possible are vaccinated. That is our best protection against this thing. And if you look at the Doherty modelling that's only come out since, that says if you double dose 80 in remote communities, 5 and up, I think you'll see our vaccine mandate is absolutely crucial to protecting lives, particularly Aboriginal lives. And I will never back away from supporting vaccines. And anyone out there who comes for the mandate, you are anti-vax.
So do you think that person is prioritizing critical thinking or feeling? Another question I would ask you is, how readily do you think that politician would implement a social credit score? This person is the definition of an authoritarian. And he is a perfect example of one of these useful idiot politicians who has drank the Kool-Aid of the global elite and is either intentionally or unintentionally helping them achieve their objectives. The whole point is, if there is this much irrationality, emotion, and hysteria around the cerveza sickness, just think the frenzy that they will whip up around climate change in the future. And the problem here is when they create this frenzy in the future, which I think will be 10 times greater than what we're seeing today with the cerveza sickness, they will already have the central bank digital currency. They'll be able to control the demand and supply. They'll have artificial intelligence. They'll have destroyed small and mid-sized business in favor of mega corporations. We'll have a social score. They'll be using this propaganda. It will be in overdrive. They'll also create the divisiveness, or the divisiveness that we have seen will get worse and worse and worse. And they will get society to accept whatever lockdowns, restrictions, or mandates they impose, regardless of how much it destroys your freedom and your liberty. But I want to be very clear. What I've outlined today on the whiteboard is not inevitable. I believe, through a lot of research and connecting the dots, that this is most likely the overall game plan of the global elites to achieve this global dominance. But it's not a foregone conclusion. We can push back. And if you study history, you'll know that there's been several times where a society has been on the road to serfdom, but they've collectively realized what has happened. They open their eyes and they get off that road to serfdom and back on a path to freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, where we'll add all of the detailed videos that we do describing and breaking down all 9 of these steps.